Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me and see the slide well. Let me know in the chat. I see a couple people joined. Hackle, can you verify that you can see my sharing, my slide, and you can hear me well? And then we'll kick the start. You can type in the chat if you want. Let me wait a few seconds here and we'll kick off our presentation. And again, welcome everyone. We'll go through exciting topic today and you will get started with data transformation services in Microsoft Azure. All right. Okay, so let's kick the presentation. As it is recorded, you can watch it later on. And let me turn on the camera. Sorry, I forgot to turn on my camera. Again, hello everyone. My name is Elhan Yusubov. You can shortly call me El, and welcome to this session. Today we are going to talk about Azure Data Transformation Services, namely Azure Data Factory, and you see the logo on the screen on the left side. Again, thank you everyone for joining to this session and dedicating your time. You could be doing other important things on Saturday, at least Saturday morning here in East Coast, USA. And thank you again. I do deeply appreciate your time for joining to this session. Let's move on. So before moving on, I want to actually give you a surprise, not the surprise, but a good news, and that's that you can actually get a learner badge from Global Azure. It was distributed to every speaker. So I'm going to share that on the screen for 30 seconds or so, so you can get that learner badge. Okay, I hope everybody see that learner badge. It's a swag from Global Azure, and it also contains this 30-day to learn challenge, where you just choose your learning challenge, and there are multiple of them. And once you complete one of those challenges within given 30 days, you are going to get some discount on that learning path. For example, if you were learning Azure Developer, that's one of the tracks, or Azure Data Analyst, and you finish that within 30 days, then based on the email registration that you receive, you will actually get a email with the link where you can get those discounted voucher for your exam registration. So I highly recommend to go and check that out. And plus, be, thank you again for joining to this session and being part of the learners within this global Azure event. You can grab this learner badge. It's on the screen. Okay. That said, I'm going to switch the screens here. I hope there was enough time for you to take that information from the screen. Okay. So let's continue where we left. All right, guys. So we left at this is a little information about myself. Okay, so who I am and what I'm doing, you can see that on the screen. I'm also running the blog, thecloudmarathoner.com, so you are more than welcome to check that. And the main idea there is to learn the cloud technologies as a community, and I'm really into diversity of the community and plus to the learning and helping to each other. That's the whole idea behind the Cloud Marathoner. And we do understand everybody that learning about cloud services and then applying that to our real world problems is not a fast thing that we can do overnight. It takes some time, it's a dedication, it's planning, but it is certainly doable. And in order to help you in that journey, I started my journey a couple years ago, and I'm welcoming everybody into this journey to be part of it and share and learn your knowledge about Microsoft Azure and other cloud solution providers, and be part of the solution, be part of the helping to your community to succeed. Uh, Probably to succeed them in starting learning and getting their launching their first job, first cloud related job. There's a lot of demand for skillful employees, for skillful people in any cloud. So helping the people to make these first steps and starting their journey, it's all plausible and likely. And you'll basically get connected with people and help everyone. That said, you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can check out my GitHub repository where I will post the code, and plus you can check the Twitter. But mainly I use the LinkedIn for communication, so feel free to get in touch with me through the Twitter. Next, I would like to speak briefly about the company where I'm employed, and it's a T-Rex Solutions. It's a mid-sized company, and it's pretty good place to grow your career and do interesting work. And mainly, T-Rex Solution is specialized in serving our government and federal civilian agencies, with U.S. Census being the largest customer that we served. And during during this project, U.S. Census 2020, our team did an excellent job in executing that program and with our partners. And T-Rex and we had actually zero downtime, 0 millisecond downtime while providing those services to U.S. citizens and everybody who is actually residing in the United States. This is a service that's done once in a 10-year, and it's very important for the government. And we're proud to deliver this mission critical service without any downtime. And it was first time that was done online in United States. And in addition to that, T-Rex is the number one cloud provider for the last 4 years. You can see that on the slide. And plus, we have strong partnership with leading cloud solution providers, and we have a strong focus on delivering these multi-cloud mission critical solutions to our federal and local government and civilian agencies. So check our open positions in T-Rex solution and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or you would like to apply. All right. So let's move forward from here with actually what we are going to cover on this presentation. Okay, I hope everybody is excited about that. All right. So what we will do, we are going to start with what are the data transformation services in Azure. Namely, we'll start with the concept that we can find in Azure Data Factory. All right, we will start with those concepts. Then we will actually continue with looking into the pipelines and activities which are part of these Azure Data Factory services. Then we'll look into linked services, and then we'll switch and look at the data sets, which are integral part of any pipeline. And then we'll look into after data sets, we'll look into pipeline execution, how we can execute that, how to build that. Then we'll look into monitoring and visibility of the pipeline and any process that's running, so that we can effectively troubleshoot and know what's going on under the hood. Then we'll look into triggers where we can schedule and automate the execution of pipeline. And finally, we'll look at data flows, how those data flows are, created and used in Azure Data Factory service. Okay. Along the way, we'll actually investigate inner workings and fundamentals of cloud-based ETL, namely Azure Data Factory service. And we'll look into integration services that allows us to create this data-driven workflows for orchestrating data movement and transforming data at scale. All right, and we will conclude our session with Q&A. All right, we are moving to the what we will not cover section, and I want to be clear that we are not going to look into any third-party integration service due to the lack of the time, and it's not our focus. Then we'll actually not talk about CI/CD, basically continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines that you can actually integrate your Azure Data Factory service with, which is pretty useful, and you need to have that in place if you are moving your pipelines into the production. In addition to that, we will not look into ADF supported external services. Again, ADF stands for Azure Data Factory. Then there are integration runtimes that we are not going to look into, even though we'll talk about one very few chapter about that, a very small chapter about that, and we'll look into advanced topics. We will not cover any advanced topics, because that's not the focus. We are trying to learn the basics and how to do the certain things, but we'll have demos. We'll have at least 2 demos at the end of the session once we know the concepts and we know how we can use the Azure Data Factory service. All right. I hope that sounds exciting for everyone. And meanwhile, if you get any questions, feel free actually to put that in the chat. I'll try to monitor the chat from time to time. All right. Okay. That said, we are moving forward here. Okay. Now let's start with the first section. What is ADF and why? And what I mean by that is that in a real world, every project requires data and some type of analytics. No matter what project you are doing, the data is an integral part of it. There is a need to trigger the batch movement of data in a project where you are dealing with different sources of data, or you have to set up a regular schedule as a requirement for most analytical solutions where you are going to move the data, prepare that, and then make it ready for analytic tools. With Azure Data Factory, namely ADF, it is a service that can be used to fulfill such requirements and perform your ETL and ELT workloads. So what is ETL stands for? It's extract, transform, load in data world, and ELT is just the extract, load, and transform that's possible to be done with those cloud services, or it's a bit different approach where you want to preserve the data in its original format and still, make the transformation on them. With ADF, basically, which is a cloud-based data integration service, you can orchestrate the movement and transformation of data between different data stores and compute resources. And I will give you the list of those compute resources and data source so that you can have a clear picture what different tooling, what different service you can use. And when I say different data tools, I mean even like S3 buckets, uh, the data services in Google Cloud, AWS, or traditional open source tooling. So you would be able to connect to all of them. And if you look at this graphic that's provided, you see some of these toolings are open source. On the left side, you have relational data information and non-relational data sources. In the middle, you have data processing and movement services. And you see there are open source databases and data analytics services mentioned there. And on the right side, what you see is basically the data analytic tools where advanced analytics, ML, AI, which is machine learning, and artificial intelligence services, they are actually services who are using those and utilizing those data, transform data, right? And where you can actually run these things, you can run those things not just on cloud, but you can also run them on your on-prem environment. Okay, so let's keep that in mind while doing anything similar. All right, let's move forward here. So next we are going to talk about top concepts in ADF. So what are these top concepts and why you need to know them, right? That's the question here. So because once you know those concepts, it would be easier for you to understand what pieces you need to bring together in order to make your pipeline, work and plus troubleshoot and make it ready for later movement into the production stage from your dev test environment. All right. So namely we'll first, of course, because we talk about data and movements, we'll start with the pipelines. A pipeline is a data factory. A data factory might have one or more pipelines. A pipeline is the logical grouping of activities that perform a unit of work. And together, the activities in pipeline perform a task. And as an example, you can have a pipeline which contains a group of activities that ingest data from an Azure Blob and then runs a Hive query on HD Insight cluster to partition the data. The benefit of this is that the pipeline allows you to manage the activities as a set instead of managing each one individually. The activities in a pipeline can be chained together. They can be chained together to operate sequentially, or they can operate independently in parallel. All right. So talking about pipelines, we mentioned activities. So what are the activities? Well, the activities represent a processing step in a pipeline. For example, you might use a copy activity to copy data from one data source to another data source. Simply, it's just that simple step that you want to add into your pipeline. And then data sets. Data sets represent data structures within data stores, which simply point to our reference, which simply point to or reference the data you want to use in your activities as inputs or outputs. Then we have these linked services. And linked services are much like connection strings, which define the connection information that's needed to that need that needed to that's needed for our data factory to connect to external resources. Then we have data flows, right? So mapping data flows, or simply data flows, create and manage graphs of data transformation logic that you can use to transform any size data. With ADF, you will execute your logic on a Spark cluster that spins up and spins down when you need it. You wouldn't ever have to manage or maintain clusters in ADF because it's done for you behind the scene by Microsoft Azure and ADF services. And finally, integration runtimes. So what's integration runtime? It is a complete infrastructure used by Azure Data Factory, ADF, to provide data integration capabilities across different network environments. All right, I understand that this is a bit confusing, might be a bit confusing because there are a number of new concepts that you may hear first time if you never done or did any prior work on this. But I think from my perspective, at least analyzing these data concepts in a relationship between, what component works with what component and why I have that in place should make it easier to digest this information. So let's move to the next slide where we have this nice graph of relationship between ADF components, namely Azure Data Factory components that you see on the screen. And here you see clearly that everything starts from the pipeline, which is on the right edge here. And it's a logical grouping of activities, right? So everything actually, the actual work happens within the, once you trigger the activities. So, and what these activities are consist of, those activities can be as simple as consuming or producing data sets in the form of tables, files, or different formats. And it can be as complex as running some services on uh, linked services. For example, it can be activity can say, okay, go and run this SQL query, or go and execute certain task on Hadoop cluster, and then bring the information or link that information to the data sets. Okay, this is the activity where it happens, and I find it very useful to go and animate that, animate this with the short video that I'm going to put on screen for everyone to have a look. Okay, this is a nice video from Microsoft, and I'm going to share that with everyone here. So let me know once you uh, hear and see this video well. Okay, we'll spend some time here. So let's have a look.
Understanding the components that are used within Azure Data Factory will enable you to easily create cloud-based data integration solutions. One of the first components you will create is a linked service. These are much like connection strings, which define the connection information needed for Data Factory to connect to external resources, such as Azure Data Lake Store or Azure Databricks. With this defined, you can then create datasets, which is a named view of data that simply points or references the data within a linked service. Data typically flows from the datasets within a linked service into activities. Activities enable you to perform an action on the data, such as copying the data or using the data in a compute resource. You can have one activity, but it is typical that you perform multiple activities on the data. These are grouped together in a component known as a pipeline. The pipeline allows you to manage the activities as a set, instead of each one individually. You deploy and schedule the pipeline, instead of the activities independently. You can dynamically update components, such as linked services at runtime, by adding parameters to give you the flexibility of using the same solution in multiple environments. In addition, the integration runtime component provides the compute infrastructure used by Azure Data Factory. It is referenced by the linked service or activity and provides the compute environment as close as possible to the target data store or compute service while meeting security and compliance needs. When authorizing Azure Data Factory solutions, you can make use of control flow components to control the flow of activities within the solution. Not all the components are necessarily required, but by understanding them, you can pick the best ones to build your cloud-based data integration solution.
Okay, we are back after this small demo, not small demo, but small introductory video, where you get more understanding about the interaction between these different components within ADF and what they do each other separately. So now let's look at this another graph where it explains what actually the ADF does, what this Azure Data Factory does. And from the nice graphic that you see on the display, data-driven workflow, that's the core part of it, is the pipeline in Azure ADF that typically performs the following 4 steps, okay? And you see those steps in the middle of the slide. It's connect and collect, or it's ingestion part, where your first step is building an orchestration system to define and connect all the required sources of data together, such as databases, file shares, and FTP web services. The next step is to ingest the data as needed to centralize location and subsequent processing. Then we have this transform, then we have, let me go back here. Okay, then what we have here is actually the transform and enrich step, right? So compute services such as Databricks and machine learning can be used to prepare or produce transform data on a maintainable and controlled schedule to feed production environments with cleansed and transformed data. In some instances, you may even augment the source data with additional data to aid analysis or consolidate it through a normalization process to be used in a machine learning experiment as an example. Then we have a published state where after the raw data has been refined into the ready consumable form of data that your business requires and also enriched later in the next step, you can then load this data into data warehousing solutions uh, such as Azure Synapse Analytics. You can also load that into Azure SQL Database or Azure Cosmos DB or whichever analytic engine your business users can point to, from their business intelligence tools, right? It can be any like Power BI and other tools, whatever they are using. And finally, the monitoring part that you see at the right edge, which is happens here. Azure Data Factory has built-in support for pipeline monitoring via Azure Monitor, API, PowerShell, and Azure Monitor logs, and health panels on Azure portal. And they can monitor the scheduled activities. They can monitor those scheduled activities and pipelines for success or failure. And you can see, what's the rate of failure or success when you're running those pipelines. I hope this actually clarifies in a big picture what it is and the concepts, because next thing that we are going to do is actually we are going to have two demos. Okay, now the important, I won't say, and now we come to the important step where we'll see Azure Data Factory in an action, and I have two simple demos. The first one is about data copy activity that you see on the screen, and there's a screenshot where we'll copy the data from one data storage, which is Azure Blob storage, into the Azure SQL database in a way that it's basically mappable. And second demo is going to be about data transformation, where we'll take the data source, which is going to be movies database, and transform data using mapping data flows in Azure Data Factory. And while transforming this data at the end, we'll get some insights into the data, all right, based on the transformation logic that we'll apply. All right, so let's start with demo number one. And to start with that demo, I'm going to bring my Azure portal. Okay, let me bring that. It's here. So in my Azure portal, as you see, I actually have a resource group. It's called CLL demo. This is done. This is the resource group where I have actually certain resources provisioned. I have these 7 resources. Namely, I have 2 Azure Data Factory uh, instances. I have the Azure SQL database that's provisioned, and I have different 2 storages. One of them is simple blob, and another one is actually uh, it's it's a Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Okay, for and you will see how I'm going to use them. All right. So this is the what we have here. So once I open the for the first demo, what we will do, we'll open this one of the pipelines. This is Azure Active Directory. This is where this is the data factory where I have the first demo. In first demo, if you remember, we are going to move data from blob storage into the Azure SQL. All right. So when we are moving this data, all right, from one storage to another, there needs to be data existing, right? So we need, as you see on the screen, as you may see on the screen, what we have in this demo is, let me make it bigger. So we have this pipeline created where we have this copy activity, all right? And within this copy activity, we are going to copy data from blob storage to SQL. And let's look into what that data will look like, right? So what that data will look like in our, okay. So that data is actually a basic, simple information that we have. All right. Okay. I'm going to navigate to my um, storage where we have that blob actually. Okay. That blob is stored in the container and under the sources. Let's see, is it this one? Okay. Let's look at that. I'm navigating to the blob where we actually have that information, and let's click on view. And as you see, it's actually this simple blob that has first name, last name. Let me zoom a little bit. These are the columns, and we have, 3 names here. This is employee, but I'm not going to use this one. We are going to use actually let me go back from this ADF tutorial. We are going to use the emptxt. That's the blob that we are going to use. and we have four. It is same format, but we have four names here. As you see, we have John, we have Mike, Nina, and John. We have four people, and our purpose is to use Azure pipeline in a scheduled way, Azure Data Factory pipeline in a scheduled way, so that we can take this data that we see and basically copy that into the table within Azure SQL database. All right. So let's see how we can do that. This is the initial data. All right, I will go back to my resource group here and switch back to the copy activity. So in order to create this pipeline, what you need to do is basically under this activities, you see this copy data. So you just need to take this copy data activity and drag it onto the pipeline. So if you drag it, you will have another copy activity as you see here. All right. So once you put that there, then you need to give a name, and you can actually use these toggles here, as you may see. Let me make it bigger. So where you will define the name, description, and information that you want to associate with this copy data activity. Okay. So this is the, let me just click on it and delete this one because we are not going to use that one, and then I will slide this. So I have already created a copy data activity as you see here. So and we are going to look, what is the source of data as a connection, what is the sink, and if there are any mappings, where are these mappings, and then we'll validate our pipeline. Okay, when you create the pipeline, so you can also keep in mind that you can have that, you can have this pipeline also as a code within your GitHub. Okay, you can connect by when you create a new source, it will ask you for connection, and in my case I'm connected to my GitHub account, to the main branch, and where all the code and modification are actually going to be stored. Okay, so I click back on this activity, which is the copy data, and I will look into the source. So within the source, what we can see, we are able to see that there's a source blob dataset, okay, that's used. So let's dive into that by clicking on the open and see what's inside. So once we click on that, we see that's actually source is a blob data. It's a CSV type of data. It's actually using this linked service. You remember we spoke about these linked services as part of these components within ADF. So it's using this linked service called Azure Storage Linked Service. And there's a way that you can test the connection. As you may see, it has this blob container ADF tutorial that we just looked into what it is. And if you remember, we showed that inside that blob, we have a file, simple file, emp text, and it's a comma delimited. It has column names, first name, last name, as you remember, and it has four records in it. We have four names, four first name, four rows of data. And to simplify this example, just to show the concept, I choose, minimum number of rows and minimum number of columns there. Okay, you may have bigger ones, you may have much more. Okay, so if we go and browse this, as you may see, can go and edit or browse this. But if you want to test the connection, I would always suggest to click on test connection to make sure that your connection is active, okay? Meaning that you can reach that data source. And once you get this connection successful, that's very important. It means that you can go for it. And if you want to look into details of this connection, just click on details, and then you'll get this panel where you will have this either Azure Key Vault or connection string, the way how you access this data source. For production environment, I would strongly advise to use the Azure Key Vault from where you get your credentials, or you can use the managed services. That's even better. That's what's advised to be done from security perspective. Now, once we connect to data source, as you may see, you can browse and select a different data source from your connection, from your linked service connection. And just to show the example, I will click on this browse, and you see, as I clicked on the browse, it actually opened the root folder, and we see those two blob containers that I just showed in the beginning of demo. Okay, so that and once we'll just click on audit tutorial and we'll select the EMP text. And once we've done that, important step here is to make sure that when you set it up, you make the first row as a header. Now, that flag is important to be checked on. Okay, once this is done, it means you can actually preview the data. That's actually a feature that you can do only if you are running this service and connection and everything is working fine. I'm going to click on this preview data to see that is this matching the data that I saw initially with you, which I demonstrate on the blob storage. So we'll click on this preview data. So once we click on preview data, I get this nice visualization from this linked service and the object that we are trying that ADF is previewing called EMP text. And as you see, it has these two columns, first name and last name, and then we have 4 rows, right? We have this 4 row of data. John, Mike, Nina, and John again. Okay, but they have different last names. All right, that's cool. So it means, everything lines up so far, so good. Next, once we analyze the source data, you can look into the schema and it will try to import the schema and show it to you. And if you want to add any parameters, you can do that step here. So I'm closing this source blob dataset now. So we looked into the source. Now the next step is sync. Sync is basically where you are going to move that data, right? So where that data is going to be ending. So in our case, it's actually another uh, output SQL data set. That's where it's going to end up. And you can click on open here. Okay. And once you click on open, it will tell you, what data linked service. In our case, it's Azure SQL database linked service we are going to use. We are going to try to test connection. We'll try to preview the data if you want on this table. And let's look at it. Okay, let's click on test connection. Okay, everything succeeded, meaning our connection is good. And before running this data, I'm going to switch back to the Azure SQL database and show you what we have there, okay? And now you can always click on edit and go here and put all the details or check the details of your connection into Azure SQL database. Once this is done, you can always refresh this to make sure that you have connection to the correct table within this Azure SQL database. And then you can click on preview data. So in our case, it said that, okay, this table already have some data because I ran this prior to making demo. So let's go and delete this data in our connection. So in order to delete this data and make it fast, I have a tool here. I'm already connected to that data store called mycll demo, as you see here. And I also see that it has a table called EMP. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually execute this query against this existing connection and say, hey, you have actually 4 rows of data. So if I want, I can actually go and say, instead of count, I can say just star here, okay, and run this query again. And as you see, fair enough, we have actually 4 rows here. And table is simple. We just have first name and last name. So what we are going to do, we are going to truncate any data that we have there. And the logic is actually, okay, I'm going to comment this and I'm going to uncomment this logic that we want to run, which is going to empty the data. Let's do that. All right, it succeeded. So let's go and try to run our query again. Okay. And see if there's any data left or not. I'm running this statement again, and as you see, it's empty now. There's nothing there. You can look that in the messages. It's also said 0, nothing. That's good because that's what we're expecting. I came back to our data source. I'm going to refresh this, okay, and click on preview data. Now it should be empty, right? You see, there's no data here because we basically empty out our destination table where the data is going to flow from our blob storage, okay, into the table. All right, because it's emptied out now, what we can do, we can look at schema. It will tell us if there's any schema and any parameter associated with that. So I'm going to close this. Okay, this data set connection. So we looked into sync here, right? So we made sure that our connection is in place. We have a table where the data is going to move and the mapping is correct. So saying about mapping, our mapping is very simple, right? Because we have a simple blob storage, which is a txt file. It's a CSV file, and it has you know, the first row is basically the header, and then we have the rows. So that, and because where we move all the data, the names of the columns are matching the table column name, so there is no mapping required. However, if you have a custom mapping, you can actually implement that here, okay, where the name of the columns on your CSV file might be different than the column names on your table that you are trying to move the data into, okay? And then there are different settings and properties in terms of integration and how much data integration units are going to be used. And you can read more about that here, okay? In this case, it says per hour is 25 cents. And you can, read more about the cost and what it is. Basically, the more data you have and the more frequently you are running your pipeline, you will just pay more. It's pay as you use kind of model, which is very traditional model for any cloud service. So, and then we have properties that we don't have anything here. So I'm going to click on this pipeline again, and I'm going to click on validate here to make sure that I didn't broke it, right? Everything is still working. So let's click on validate. It will take a second, and on the right side, I get the information that your pipeline has been validated. So no issues, nothing to worry about. So I'm going to debug now. So to debug this, it means that it will just run this initial pipeline. Okay, let's click on debug and make sure that when it is trying to map and do the things, you see it's actually queued here. Okay, the copy data is queued here. All right, so it's going to take a little bit of time to validate this pipeline, and then we'll get duration and other information. So here it is succeeded, as you see. Okay, it says that okay, this validation succeeded, everything went as planned. And now, does it mean that your data actually moved from your blob to the SQL table? Let's check it. Let's check. Let's go back to I'm back to my SQL Server Management Studio where I'm connected to the table where the data should go. I refreshed it. Okay, let's make sure we refresh it. And then I'm going to run this again. All right, let's run it. Okay, here we see results and we have 4 rows, meaning that while debugging, we're able actually to move the data, all right, which is very good. It means that it's working and it is working as was expected. But in addition to that, uh, if you want to actually look into this from the monitoring perspective, on the right side here, you see we have monitoring. So I'm just going to click there on the monitoring section, and here you see when we come here, we have 2 sections, debug and triggered. So after a certain time, it should reflect that here. So we don't have any triggers, no debugs. Oh, here it is. So here it come. So because I run it twice, one is before session today and one during the session, which is approximately the time where we are now, maybe a minute or two ago. And instead, we actually run this copy pipeline. And if I click on that copy pipeline, it will bring me to that copy pipeline where it is. And you can look into the chart, you can look into the details here. You see, so it says that it was actually moving data from your blob storage into SQL database. And these are the statistics regarding that task. Okay, what happened, which is pretty good to know about. Again, let's go back here to our author. I clicked here on author to go back to our pipeline, and we click on our pipeline here. So you can go ahead and create a schedule. Okay, if you want to schedule this data movement, let's say happen every day and you want to happen that every hour it's possible. You can also make sure that it can happen, every day once, let's say at AM hours when you have less load, and you want to make sure that you can move certain mission critical data pieces from your one data source to another. Okay, so how it can be done? So in order to do that, you can use triggers. As you may see, you can trigger it right now and you can debug it, or you can actually edit that. All right. So let's look at existing trigger that I created prior, and I call it run it every minute. Okay, that's what's going to do. Let's click on it. And the setting trigger is pretty easy. You just need to define the date and time when you want that to start and when you want that to end. Okay, so in my case, I'm going to change that trigger. Okay, I'll click on it, and here I'm going to select today's date, which is we are on April 17th. Okay, here it is, April 17th, Saturday. And as a time on my local time is 8:17, so I will make sure it's actually running at 8:19. I'll just give a little bit loss, or yeah, let's make it 8:19. And it's AM hour here, so I say okay. And then as the end date and time, I need to also select appropriate time. In my case, I will select the same April 17 and 8:20, 8 AM, and let's make 20 here. All right, and it is AM, and then say okay, and then say, so basically it should run our schedule. Let's save it, but in order to have this a little bit better, let me extend that time. End time is very close. Let's make it actually 8:22 here. So it can run a couple times. 23 also works fine. Okay, but we need to make sure that we publish it. Okay, without publish, it's just not gonna run. Let's run it. Okay, cancel. So it's 8:19. All right. Okay, and publish our pipeline. Save. So once we save it, we need to go here and publish our pipeline, as you see on the top. Publish. So once this published, it means why it is required. It is something that we publish into the GitHub repository, as you see here, our data factory, so that the changes and configurations that we made are actually stored and they are going to be active. So once this publishing completed, you would get this notification on top, which means that no, and it will generate an ARM template, which is a not which is going to be another configuration of our pipeline in GitHub repository, so that we can take that and recreate our pipeline easily without manually dragging and dropping and making all the changes. So once this is all done, let's click on refresh. Okay, here it is. So what we should expect here is that in a minute, it's 8:19 my local time. So within a minute or two, we are going to go to the monitoring section you see here on the left side and check our scheduling. So each time it runs the schedule, meaning it's going to move those data, 4 rows of data from Blob into the table, and the number of rows in my table is going to grow. Okay, so let's click on monitoring, and here by default, as you may see, we have debug, right? So this one are 2 instances that we already looked into. So let's look at triggered. So when I go to the triggered one, okay, here it is. I see that, okay, there's one triggered at 8:19 and another one just triggered on 8:20, which is local time now. And if I scroll to the right, okay, it will tell us that what was the trigger name. If you remember, the trigger name was run every minute, and that's what it says here. It says what was the approximate duration of running, and did it succeed or not? What's the status? You'll get all these operational details of your pipeline running or not running, and is it failing or not, and as well as how long does it take to run this pipeline, because this duration will give you approximate time which you can map into the cost of running this pipeline each time when you request, so that you have a predictable bill at the end of the month. Okay, so you have a clear understanding uh, what to expect. All right, that's good. So if I click on refresh again here, you see now it is 3, because if you remember, we said that pipeline to run for a couple minutes, and this is the next one that just appeared. So now, in order to make sure that actually our data is growing, I'm going to back to our SQL Server Management Studio, okay? And then here, if you remember, we had this select all. I'm just going to look into the count, okay? We had 4 rows before, so I'm going to look into the count of how many data I have here, and I will just simply click on execute. And this time you see there's 16 rows. Actually, it means each time the pipeline runs, it adds 4 more rows, and this is the result to expect, which is not a surprise, meaning that our pipeline is working. Okay, so that's it for now. If you refresh for till 8:23, it's going to run. So there will be probably one more run here, and you can rerun that here if you want, and you can look into the consumption. Okay, how much time, how many data movement activities, DIU hours were used. You can learn about that and look into the pricing calculator, just to get a better understanding, what it costs to run this pipeline. Okay. All right, that's all for this demo. The next demo is about data transformation. Let me show it to you. Let's So the next demo is about data transformation, where we take the movie database and then we filter that by year, and we select the comedy genre, and we filter for certain years, and then we aggregate that by comedy genre, and then we look what is the result. Okay, in our case, we should expect this 83 rows. So I'm going to briefly switch and show you that, and I wouldn't be able to walk you in detail, but this is the pipeline, transform the movies pipeline that's created here. We need to make sure that we have this data flow debug on. This is the where integration runtime is switched on. It will take some time. It may take up to 4 or 7 minutes. We may not have enough time actually for this pipeline to warm up, but keep that in mind. And that's what I want to actually mention, that here on top of the bar, you see this data flow debug slider. So debug mode, what it does, it allows for interactive testing of transformation logic against a live Spark cluster. Okay, that's what is spinning behind the scene. And data flow clusters can take 5 to 7 minutes to warm up, and users are recommended to turn on debug first if they do plan to use the data flow in development. All right, so this is the debug mode that we are turning on. It will take some time. So while it's going to take some time, let me click on this. So let me show what this pipeline is about. Here on the left side, you can get some information that this pipeline has 2 data sets and 1 data flow. Let's look into that. So in data sets, it has MovieDB, which is the data source where we have this, where we have the sample data from movies came out in United States between 1910 and 2000 years. And what it does basically, it gives you the average rating of comedy movies. Okay, and you can use this actually in configuring. You can use that in different flows, but the whole idea of this second demo, is the using the Azure Data Factory user interface to create uh, a pipeline that copies and transforms the data from Azure Data Lake storage. Okay, that's what it does. It copies the from Azure Data Lake storage to another Azure Data Lake storage Gen 2 as a thing, using the mapping and data flow. And how this data mapping and data flow looks like, if you click on this data flow here on the right side, it will open this data flow Okay, as you see, it consists of multiple steps. It's about getting this data from source movies database, which is in a it's a big file, and I will upload that into GitHub. You can take it from there, where you have different information about the movies, different genres between years of 1910 and 2000. Okay, it has so what this pipeline does, it takes that information, filters by year, it narrows down to the year that we want, and then it aggregates this rows, filtered rows by comedy genre, and then it's actually put the ones that have good ratings, it puts them into this thing. Okay, it's aggregate them and put them into the thing. And once you run this, you see this still our debug data flow is still warming up, so I can't actually show you it because of that movement. It will take some time. I forgot to put that on in the beginning of the presentation, but that's what is going on now. But once this warmed up, basically, and you run this data transformation by clicking on debug, still actually warming up here. Once you run it, you can also, trigger the you can add a trigger that can do that periodically for your end. But speaking about this each set, it's about getting the data from data set, then it's actually filtering that based on the criteria that we put here in this. And you can look into the expression, how you can build that. It says that go and take the genre of comedy. And after that, we aggregate the data where we filter them by years, okay? And once this is done, uh, last step is that we are moving everything into the sink, okay? So let me show it's actually green now, as you see. So I will just run it once here. So let's go and validate everything first. Seems everything is fine. Then I'll go to the pipeline here and debug it. You see it's actually red here. So we'll click on debug here. Okay, as you see here on the top, you have this queued. You have a queued pipeline. It's going to run this pipeline. It has each pipeline is run is going to have a unique ID. As you see here, it will have the name of the pipeline, what you are running, and start date. Okay, so it's queued to be executed, which is good. It's in progress now at this moment. And once this run through each pipelines, we'll have actually view into the data. There's a details you can look on this. All right. So as you see here, still running this pipeline. Okay. And this is we'll get information pretty soon. I'm going to close this for now. Okay, it's running this. It's in progress. So once this run, basically we'll get some output into our Azure Data Lake storage. And let me switch and show you that to you. This is our Azure Data Lake storage provisioning here. Okay. And as you see, this is the container that we have. And in this container, we have sample data. I will click on it. And here we have output folder. This is the movies database CSV file that I talked about. All right. And I can just try to open this. It's a bit big file. I'm not sure if you can get a good, yeah, oh, here it is. So basically this is the data that I talked about. Each of them have a movie, certain ID of the movie, title, genre, year rating, and Rotten Tomato rating. Okay, this is the way how the movies are rated. Okay, and anything that's actually where you have above average rating, it was good, you will have better number here. Okay, it's on the scale 1 to 100. All right, so that's it. This is the data. In output, we'll get certain files generated and aggregations. Everything is going to be dumped here into this sink. So let's switch back to our actual pipeline. It's actually succeeded. All right, this is the transform movies pipeline that we clicked on debug, and it actually succeeded. That what we see here. And if you look at the final data details of what happened, you would get for each step, you would get, details. You can look into them on the right side. You can get those information here, what was filtered, how it was aggregated, and what was the sync. So basically, where did this data go? And as a result, you should get 83 rows out of more than 9,125 movies. Okay. All right, that's all for today. I hope you liked this demo, and you can check my GitHub repo to look into that. I will bring back the slide where we were. Okay, this was the slide where we were. I demo you some data transformation pipeline, and we fast forwarded that due to the time. But what we have covered was the ADF concepts, different different components that it has, and we looked at each of them. And now Q&A section. I will keep it for a minute or two, and then we'll conclude our session. I will monitor the chat. If you have any question, please feel free to put that there. Okay, that's all. Okay, I'm monitoring the chat here to see if anybody ask any questions, but that's all for today. Thank you everyone who joined. Looks like we don't have any urgent questions, but you can always reach out to me through LinkedIn. You can, visit my GitHub repo or tweet, and I will reach back to you. Again, thank you everyone for connecting today with me and being part of this session. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.